I have my questions here. Well, thank you, Heather, for the introduction. Thank you very much, Yvon, for coming today. I think that Patagonia is a very large company. It's been considered one of the great places to work in the US for over 20 years. And I think Yvon has made he's a very contrarian in the way he's an entrepreneur and he's a businessman. I think it'll be very refreshing to hear what he says. It's definitely very different to what we've been hearing these past 2 days. And I'm curious. One of the first things is, in the book, Let My People Go Surfing, has a second line, the education of a reluctant businessman. So why do you believe that all these wonderful aspiring entrepreneurs are getting together today to listen to a reluctant businessman?
I don't really know, to tell you the truth, but I mean, my definition of an entrepreneur is, if you want to understand the entrepreneur, study the juvenile delinquent. Because they're saying, oh, this sucks, I'm going to do it my own way. And when I was in grammar school, I was in school in Maine, and a little French-speaking town. And I moved to California when I was 7 and couldn't speak English and was put in school right away. And shortest kid in school. But I could play baseball, as well as anybody. But whenever it came time to actually play a game with people watching, I couldn't do anything. So that led me into playing down at the LA River, catching crawdads and frogs and shooting rabbits with my bow. And so I took a different path, and I realized that I wasn't good at playing normal games. So I invented my own games. And so I've all my life I've gone into doing self-motivated sports like kayaking, whitewater kayaking, spearfishing, climbing, all of these different things that are not team sports. I've never liked people telling me what to do, and I don't like telling other people what to do. So that's kind of my entrepreneurial spirit right here.
Patagonia promotes the idea of sustainable clothing in the sense that a jacket should last a lifetime, not a couple of years. Patagonia will repair your clothing items, and it would also help you sell or even swap your clothing items for other Patagonia clothing. This seems very contradictory to our capitalist society, our capitalist approach to business. Any comments, Yvon?
Well, I mean, if you want to be a responsible consumer, don't buy anything. Just don't buy anything new. Okay, a Prius gets better mileage than a Chevy, but don't turn your Chevy over and sell it to somebody else and buy a Prius. That's not the responsible thing to do. You just put another car on the road. It's better to keep driving your Chevy. And in clothing, most of the damage done in the making and wearing of clothing is done in the wearing of the clothing. So if you buy a piece of clothes that has to be dry cleaned or has to be ironed or whatever, you're wasting much more energy than ever went into making the clothes. So the most responsible thing is to buy used clothes. And so we try to make our clothing last as long as possible, which I try to put as much quality as possible into it so that it can be handed down to somebody else. It can eventually be We design it so that it can be recycled into more clothing, whether it's polyester or nylon 6 or cotton or wool. We'll take it back and recycle it into more clothes. So we feel that's the most responsible thing to do. And you think, oh, well, that's cutting into your business. You're not cutting into the business at all. It's just good business. And in fact, I found that a friend of mine in Jackson Hole went to a garage sale recently and bought it's called a Das Parka. That's a jacket we put out about 10 years ago. It was in perfect shape. The woman wanted $30. She probably stole it or something. She wanted $30. He offered her 15. He took that jacket, put it on eBay. Somebody in Japan called him and said, hey, I'm interested in buying that jacket. What do you want for it? He said, oh, I don't know, make me an offer. He said, well, how about $750? So he took it, and the Japanese guy who works for me said, oh, what a sucker. That Japanese guy is going to sell it for $5,000.
Yvon, tell us a little bit about last year's Black Friday and what happened. What did Patagonia offer and what actually happened?
Well, we do a lot of marketing, but our marketing philosophy is just tell people who we are. We do very little advertising. We only spend 0.5% of sales on advertising. But it's last year on Black Friday we decided, hey, let's take all our revenue, the whole sales from that day and give it away to environmental causes. So the year before we did about $2.5 million. And we didn't advertise it, we just put it on social media 3 days before. And I was out somewhere and I get a call and I said, hey, it was 2 in the afternoon. He said, we're up to 6 million. And then 6 o'clock at night, we're up to 10. I said, oh my God. We didn't plan on this. And you think, wow, that's an awful lot of profits you just lost right there. But you know what? 60% of the sales were to customers that had never bought from us before. I mean, we could have put an ad on Super Bowl, 2-minute ad, and spent $5 million like Marmot did and gotten nothing out of it. And here we've got, I don't know how many thousands of new customers who never bought from us before. That's the best marketing thing we could have ever done. Although we never did it as a marketing thing, this was after the Trump election, and we felt like everybody needed some good news. And you know what? Our sales did not go down the next day. And in fact, they continued all through Christmas and has been continuing ever since.
Yvon, Patagonia is known for outdoors clothing. Although in the past years, you've become very involved into food and into books.
Well, I'm very pessimistic about the fate of our home planet here. And when the United Nations says we're going to need between 20 and 70% more food by 2050, I see that as an opportunity. We may not need to be wearing, expensive outdoor clothing in 2050, but we're going to need to eat. And also, I've gotten pretty excited about the idea of using agriculture to capture carbon. We're finding out that it's probably the best thing we can do. I mean, agriculture contributes a lot to global warming, and which means it probably can be the solution as well. And so the idea of doing a regenerative style agriculture which builds topsoil as opposed to ordinary organic agriculture, is pretty exciting to me. So we're having to go around now to our cotton suppliers and our farmers and say, we don't want you to plow anymore, because every time you plow, you release all the carbon that you've captured. So we want you to do no-till farming and use cover crops and compost, and we're big enough to be able to ask and have them do that. And I'm pretty excited about, I think organic agriculture has not gone far enough. It needs to go to what is called regenerative agriculture, which builds topsoil and can really feed the world. This green agriculture, does not feed the world. It only contributes 30% of the food that we eat. This industrial Monsanto type agriculture, the 70% is done by little small farmers around the world, and I think we can convince them to change over to a regenerative style of agriculture. It's the only hope I see. So I want to lead by example in our Patagonia provisions. And I've always been interested in agriculture anyway, and I feel like I've accomplished what I set out to do with clothing, and this is a whole new world to conquer, I think.
And books?
Well, books, I don't know. It's just, we have so many friends that do exciting things, and, it's tough to get a book published anymore, and so we just can't say no. It's not a money maker, let me tell you.
Yvon, Patagonia was the first big corporation to be incorporated in California a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Why is being a big corporation important to you?
Well, the entire system in the States forces a company eventually to become public. And I don't know of any public companies that are really responsible. They're all strictly profit-driven. In any case, it's not your money, so you can't do what you want with it. You have to maximize profits for the shareholders. And if you become a B Corp, you can say what your values are and basically carve them in stone. And like my stock is owned by a trust. And the law says, my wife and I die, the trust has 8 years to divest 80% of the stock because they don't want a foundation to have all the stock in one company. And so if we sold, and you have to sell to for the highest price. Imagine what I could get for this company if I went public. But it would be the end of the company. This company, my company exists because it is not public, and we can make crazy decisions like giving all our revenue away for Black Friday. A public company can't do that. And so being a B Corp, we write down what our values are, and one of the values is that we don't have to be sold to the highest bidder. So it's a way to have continuity in the company when we die off. So,
given your concern about doing what's good, doing what's the best, why not sell the company outright and do good by donating the money, investing the money in people who are doing good themselves?
Well, I've thought about that, and I naively thought that by doing the right thing in business and, cleaning up our supply chain as far as we can possibly go and being as responsible as can be and being profitable, we can show the rest of the business world that you don't have to be like other corporations. I was pretty naive in thinking that, because I think there's a lot of greenwashing going on. There's very, very few companies that are really serious about being truly responsible. They're all small companies. I don't know any large companies. And but anyway, we're going to continue on doing what we're doing, and I can tell you that every time we make a decision, because it's the right thing to do, it ends up making more profit. It's just, I really believe in karma. It just happens.
Many of those in the crowd, myself included, we are from outside the US. How much of Patagonia's history and culture is due to the fact that this is a company born in California and in the US?
Well, a lot of my values and some of the people that started Patagonia and stuff were all children of the 60s, where we thought businessmen were all greaseballs. And certainly, the government was the enemy and, all that stuff. And so I built a company, kind of a contrarian company. Like, I've got this book, which is the philosophy of my company, called Let My People Go Surfing. And it's because I have a company policy that we're down in Ventura, which has really good surf within walking distance of the company. And so when the surf comes up, you go surfing. You don't go next Thursday at 2 o'clock. Then you're a loser. Because there's no surf. So, how many companies have a policy that I don't care when you work or where you work, as long as the work gets done. And we hire very, very independent people, very self-motivated people, because historically I didn't want to be at work every day. And like I said, I don't like telling people what to do. And so I built a company that we have open offices, no cubicles. And so it's kind of like there's a woman at Stanford University that studies ant colonies. And ants have been around millions and millions of years, way longer than humans. And they've basically been unchanged. And they don't have any bosses. They communicate with touching feelers, but every ant knows what his job is. And there's no one standing over him telling him what to do. And they get the work done. But when you I've hired such independent people. I've had a psychologist look at our company and say, gee, I got to tell you, these are the most independent people I've ever seen. In fact, they're unemployable anywhere else. So how do you get all these independent people all going in one direction? Because, these guys are real aces at doing a passive-aggressive response. So that's my job, and that's basically my CEO's job, and to build consensus. We make decisions by consensus, as opposed to our government, which makes decisions by compromise, which never solves the problem, leaves both sides feeling cheated. So to build consensus, you've got to put your work into it. And that's why I wrote the book, because, there's our values. And this is how we make decisions. And then we leave everybody alone. I'm taking off for 6 months. I got a log cabin in Wyoming, and I go fishing for 6 months. I probably call in 2 or 3 times in those 6 months. No, I'd say, look, okay, the warehouse burns down. What can I do? You know what to do. So, I mean, I've built a company up that doesn't really need me, except to come up with some wild and crazy ideas that they either talk me out of them or, or we do it.
Growth being such an important motivator for companies and for people, I would ask what motivates the people at Patagonia, and are they demotivated by slower than possible growth?
Well, you know, there's growth and there's growth. I mean, you can grow fat or you can grow strong. And we believe in natural growth because I never wanted to have a company in the first place. And I certainly didn't want to have $1 billion company. But it just happens. And we grow what we call natural growth. So we don't put ads in Vanity Fair or Outside Magazine and try to encourage more people to buy from us. We're pretty good at marketing, but we do very little advertising. And so every year we look and see, okay, how many customers have we frustrated because we ran out of product this year? So what is a natural demand for our stuff? You know, that's opposed to a public company which plugs in 15% every year. And so that's artificial. And at some point it catches up with you and down you go. And so, you know, we grew, I don't know, 17% this year. That just happened to be the natural demand for our products. And the outdoor industry is not very healthy right now. A lot of companies are struggling. And we're going like this. And that's, I think, because the customers have changed. The millennium generation particularly believes in authenticity. They don't believe in all those advertisements. They're not watching television like the previous generation. They're concerned about destroying this planet, and they're supporting companies that are responsible. And so we can't help it. The growth is just coming to us.
Yvon?
I put a spin on it and say, well, you know, thank you for, we try to tell people, think twice before they buy a jacket. Do you really need it, or are you just bored, or, you know? In fact, we came out with an ad in last year in the national edition of the New York Times that said, don't buy this jacket unless you think twice about it. Do you really need it? But if you do buy it, thank you, and here's the promise that we make for you. We'll repair it. If something happens to it, it's guaranteed for life. If you outgrow it, you become bored with it, we'll help you sell it to somebody else. When it's finally completely, in fact, we had to start, it forced us to start the largest garment repair center in North America. We're trying to convince our customers to sew their own buttons on. We've got a truck going around to colleges around the country. They park the truck and they repair any kid's clothes. It doesn't matter whether it's Patagonia or not, just to try to get people to think about repairing things instead of throwing them away. And then when the product is finally completely finished, we build the product so that it can be recycled, which means if it's a polyester jacket, we try to do every part of the jacket out of polyester so the whole thing can be melted down into more polyester, which saves 70% of the energy. And so we recycle absolutely every piece of Patagonia. So you think, you know, selling used clothes and repairing and all that stuff, doesn't that cut into your business? I mean, 17% growth this year. I don't want any more than that. It's just good business. I mean, think of all these electronics that can't be repaired. There's some young guys down in San Luis Obispo that a few years ago figured out how to repair an iPhone, where iPhone was trying to make it so that nobody could repair them. You had to get a new one. And these guys figured out how to repair them. So then they tried to even make it more bomb-proof. And these guys figured out how to... They've got a great little business repairing iPhones.
Yvon, any companies you like, you admire, you look after?
Yeah, you stumped me on that one, to tell you the truth. There's some I thought I admired, and when you really look into it, there's a lot of greenwashing going on. No, not really.
We all stand on someone else's shoulders. Who are your mentors? Who are your mentors, your inspirators?
Well, I really don't have any business mentors. I mean, we had to reinvent everything about my company, and I mean, you won't believe how different it is, and how we do things differently. I did have a lot of help from Doug Tompkins, who started Esprit here in San Francisco. He was a really good friend of mine, and he and his wife were in the clothing business, and they helped us in some ways in the past. But my heroes have always been adventurers, climbers, and stuff like that. So I did study. When I decided, one day I woke up and I said, "Oh my God, I am a businessman." And I decided to find out what I was doing. And so I read as many books as I could on business, and particularly Japanese styles of business, because they were so concentrated on quality. And you know, I started out in business making climbing equipment, and I was a blacksmith, and so we made the best climbing equipment in the world. And to go from making the best climbing equipment to making clothing, we applied the same values. So we were the first ones, I think, to really apply principles of industrial design to making clothing. So when I look at a bikini, so we make bikinis. So I look at it as a tool. So what does our bikini have to do? Well, you got to look good in it. But more than anything, that bikini is going to be sold to a woman who's going to be body surfing or riding 20-foot waves, and she doesn't want the top to fall down. So, you know, we develop a fabric that's kind of clingy and won't come off, yet it's got to look good. So, you know, normal fashion design, you take a mannequin, you put some cloth around it, you pin it here and there, and you've created a dress. When we design a pair of socks, we say, okay, what are these socks supposed to do? Do they go underneath a ski boot? Do they go, their dress sock, whatever it is? So we look at it as, number one, a functional problem, and then we build to that. And so that's been our secret of success, I think, in that we've been so quality driven. And you know, there's a group of companies around the world. I forgot what they're called now. There's 200 of them, and they've been around for 200 years. There's no American companies, of course. There's European companies, some Japanese companies, and the overriding value behind every one of these companies is quality. Some of them are way different than they were when they started out, but they've maintained that sense of ultimate quality all through their 200-year lifespan.
Any regrets with Patagonia?
Well, I've made a lot of mistakes in hiring people, I think. I'm a terrible, terrible person for hiring. You can bullshit me. You can read my book and then repeat it back, and I think, oh, God, let's hire this guy. So I stay out of the hiring part, and I leave that up to women. They're really good at that. And in fact, I don't know if you know, but we have over 70% women in my company. My CEO is a woman. Most of my managers are women. I find that if you're going to have a company where people work together, it's good to have women. They're less competitive. It's not a company that you think, you look at your fellow worker and you feel like you got to compete with this guy so that you get ahead and he doesn't. We don't have that type of situation. So I think it's good to have a lot of women in there.
Would you describe yourself more as a thinker or as a doer?
Well, I'm a doer. I solve problems. There's different ways to solve a problem. You can study it to death until you've taken all the risk out of it and you make a move. And my attitude is, I come up with an idea and I immediately take the first step. If that feels good, I take another step. If it feels bad, I step back. That's the way I solve problems. And but being an entrepreneur, I'm thinking all the time about new ideas. I just came up with one I can't get out of my head. I was just down in Patagonia in Argentina, and there's a bunch grass called cowe. It's about this tall, a big bunch grass, and when it dries, it makes the best toothpicks you've ever seen. I mean, it's got a little rough texture, so that it really cleans your teeth perfectly. You put it between two teeth, and it flattens, but it doesn't bend. I mean, it's way better than any plastic toothpick I've ever seen. I thought, well, we could put them in these little boxes with the Patagonia world's best toothpick. I mean, this. It's the kind of stuff that goes through my head.
And last question before we open to the audience. How does it feel to be a best-selling author and a highly demanded speaker? Was that in the plans?
No, not at all. In fact, I try to avoid giving talks anymore. I try to stay pretty private. I only did this because Sebastian here is a good friend of mine. And, I'm not a best-selling author. My book has been done in 10 or 11 languages or something, but it's not a bestseller.
Okay. My questions are over, and I think there's a nice audience and plenty of questions out there, so it's up to you guys.
Hi, I'm Carlos from Nevia. And first of all, I want to tell you that you and your book and Patagonia has always been a guiding light for our company. And then I would like to hear from a contrarian, how has your idea of success has changed when you started Patagonia, and what is your idea of success now?
Well, I went through what every entrepreneurial company goes through, where you're a small little entrepreneurial company, you're working your head off, And you reach a certain size, and it doesn't work being an entrepreneurial company anymore. You have to become a real company. And most entrepreneurial companies can't survive that. It happened to us in 1989, and we almost lost the company. And but if you make it over that hump, then you got a good chance of making it for a long time. And at that time, we considered success was being able to make the payroll and pay our bills. And now, we're independent of the banks. We're pretty much cruising, and I think for my wife and I, success is at the end of the year. If you ask me how much profit we made last year, I don't know. I have paid no attention to it. Success is measured by how much good we've done. I mean, it sounds corny, but we started this organization, 1% for the Planet, where it's 1,500 different companies that all give 1% of their sales to environmental causes. Because of Black Friday, now we have to give away 20 million this year instead of 10. But that's cool. That's I've never had a desire to have a business. I never wanted to be a big business. I'm a craftsman. I just happen to be good at working with my hands and coming up with ideas. Every time we went to the mountains, we'd come back with ideas on how to make better climbing gear and stuff like that. And so I can't help myself. But like I said, I'm pretty pessimistic about the fate of the planet. And success for us is to feel like we're not part of the problem, we're part of the solution.
What's your favorite place to surf?
What was that?
Favorite place to surf?
To surf, yeah.
Favorite place to surf? I can't tell you that. Otherwise, it would no longer be my favorite place.
Just a simple question. Why did you call it Patagonia, coming from Maine?
Well, in 1968, my friend Doug Tompkins and I drove from Ventura all the way to the tip of South America. And we went down to this mythical place, Patagonia. And in those days, nobody knew where Patagonia was. It was like, how many people know where Timbuktu is, It was this magical name. In fact, in Mexico, if a parent asks a kid, where you been? And the kid wants to just diss him, he just says, I've been in Patagonia, which means I've been somewhere. So we were in Patagonia, and we climbed this mountain, Mount Fitzroy, and it's had a big effect on Tompkins and myself. And, it's a wild place. It's one of the last wild places on Earth. And, it's near Cape Horn. It's got these high winds and crazy orange skies and big lenticulars and mountains. And so I thought, this is the kind of place that I want to make clothing for. And my friend Doug Tompkins devoted, when he sold Esprit, devoted his life to saving Patagonia. In fact, he died last year in a kayaking accident with me, and his wife was my CEO for 13 years, Chris Tompkins McDivitt. And she just handed over 1 million acres to the Chilean government of new national parks. and part of the deal was Chile had to throw in 10 million acres. So there's 11 million acres of new national parks in Chile because of, Doug and her being in love with that place. And that's just the beginning. They're working in Argentina with lots more land, and they were just entrepreneurs. Chris Tompkins was a high school girl living on the beach next to me, and we hired her as a part-time shipper. When she went to school, surfer girl, she'd go barefooted. The teacher would tell her to go home, and she'd come back the next day with a leather lace wrapped around her toes, saying, "Those are sandals." Doug Tompkins dropped out of school at 15. I met him climbing in New York, and became a great entrepreneur. And entrepreneurs get things done, let me tell you. Or else they end up in prison, one of the two.
From your answers, we got the idea that maybe you think that a good thing would be that most companies in the world are like yours in the future. What do you think, in terms of the market of the world itself, in consequence of that, would be this market in case, for example, all the companies or many companies would be like yours?
Well, all I can say is, what we do is just good business. I really believe in karma. I think, we're going through a very difficult age right now. The blue-collar worker is out of work. They're angry. They've been replaced by robots, automation. The middle class is rapidly being replaced by the digital age. They say by 2030, not very long from now, 38% of the people working now will be out of work. What does that mean for capitalism? It means there won't be any consumers. So we have to reimagine capitalism. We can't be consuming, discarding endlessly, and expecting the market to be there always. It's going to have to be a change.
We have time for 2 more questions. So, there's one here.
Yes, I grew up climbing granite walls in Italy and dreaming, following your tracks on Fitzroy or in Yosemite. But I still feel into myself the fight between business time and surfing time. Which is your secret? Which is the rule you follow to not to have this fight?
You lost me a little bit there. What?
So, surfing time, climbing time,
Yeah,
and businessman time.
yeah.
Which is your secret? Finding an equilibrium between.
You can create. If you're creating a business, you can create it any way you want. You can make yourself indispensable so that you're calling. You take a day off and you're calling 10 times a day because basically you're saying, how are you doing without me? And for me, I don't need that. And so I created a company that if my CEO left tomorrow, the company would go on for 6 months without any change. It's not top-down type company. But you can create, any way you want. It all depends on what your values are. You can create a company that you're going to cash out in 5 years and go play golf over here or whatever. I really believe that. And for my company, I can't hire any MBAs. I just can't. They're molded. Especially if they've been working in another company, they're molded in such a way they don't fit in, especially ones at golf. we just throw those resumes out.
Do we have the last one over there?
Hi, this is Santiago from Colombia. First of all, I'm humbled to be in this space. It was fantastic listening to your thoughts and answers to many of the questions that we had here. And my question goes to the following. We're in this generation where they tell you, find purpose in life. And do it fast because you're short of time. Now, I'm a young entrepreneur. I lead a few people for the last couple of years, and I tell them, hey, we have to find purpose of what we're doing, but it's extremely hard to understand what's your role in society, in business, and being part of what we build. Then my question to you is, were you able, or have you been able to find purpose, perhaps at what age, and what helped you find purpose?
I don't know. I think each one of us has certain resources, whether you're a good speaker, you're a good writer, you're a photographer, you're just a businessman, you've got people working for you. Whatever resources you have, you can use those resources. And you have a responsibility to use those resources, I think. I believe that evil is stronger than good, because if you do nothing, evil wins. To do good, you actually have to do something. And so it keeps me on my toes, keeps me from getting whacked in the back of the head. But I think each one of you has to decide what it is you can do well, and then use it to do some good, because we're in really perilous times, let me tell you. It's if we don't do anything, evil's going to win.
Okay, Yvon, thank you very much for being with us. Thanks to the audience.
Thank you.